Okay, let's unpack this. We are embarking on a deep dive today into the life of a figure who steps onto the grand stage of Scripture for just a brief moment, but who provides one of the most compelling and I think practical portraits of spiritual maturity in the entire Old Testament, Barzillai the Gileadite.
His appearance is short, you're right.
Hmm.
But the insight his story offers is, well, it's monumental.
Yeah.
Especially for those of us trying to navigate a world that's just obsessed with upward mobility and, endless achievement.
Mm.
Barzillai steps into the light during one of the darkest and most turbulent moments in Israel's history. We're talking about the intense, terrifying chaos of Absalom's rebellion against his own father, King David.
A civil war.
Exactly. It was a time when panic reigned and loyalties were tested to the absolute breaking point, and yet Barzillai, he's defined by this remarkable steadiness, this inner peace.
That steadiness is the absolute core of our source material today. The mission of this deep dive is to really conduct a detailed pastoral examination of this idea of confident contentment. And we're using Barzillai's life as the primary case study for that.
Yeah.
He embodied a quiet, a generous, and a deeply satisfied spirit, anchored not in status, not in the pursuit of wealth, and definitely not in political ambition. It was profoundly anchored in a settled trust in God.
And the foundational thesis that's really guiding our discussion is this. Barzillai was a faithful servant, full stop. And his contentment, it flowed from this bedrock reliance on the Lord's provision.
Okay.
His life is marked by two crucial defining moments.
Mm-hmm.
First, doing what was right, serving David when it was dangerous, and then, just as powerfully, knowing precisely when and how to gracefully decline the greatest honor a king could possibly offer.
And for you, the listener, we really believe this story presents a profound, a contemporary challenge. It forces us to slow down and examine what it genuinely means to be satisfied under God's hand in this modern age. Because while Barzillai is an Old Testament figure, his actions are a living, breathing illustration of those New Testament virtues, That fruit of the Spirit, that contentment we are constantly encouraged to cultivate.
Yes.
I mean, think of the Apostle Paul's powerful words in Philippians 4, where he says he's learned the secret of being content in any and every circumstance.
Right.
Or 1 Timothy 6.6, which states so plainly that godliness with contentment is great gain. This ancient history, it directly informs that modern pursuit of peace.
I really appreciate that focus on contentment because, so often we only celebrate the ambition in the Bible.
Sure.
The prophets who challenge kings or the generals who win the battles. But Barzillai, he's a hero of sufficiency.
That's a great way to put it. A hero of sufficiency. So to really appreciate that courage and that sufficiency, we have to start by setting the stage. We have to understand what was happening in Israel at this time. Barzillai lived during a genuinely volatile period of internal fracture in the monarchy, specifically Absalom's rebellion. This was not some border skirmish. This was a sudden, violent civil war ignited by David's own son.
The word volatile doesn't even do it justice. We're talking about a sudden political coup.
Right.
Absalom, who was charismatic and deeply popular, he stole the hearts of the people and chased his own father, the anointed king, right out of Jerusalem.
So loyalties were instantly divided.
Instantly. And for those watching from the periphery, choosing the wrong side meant ruin.
And this is where Barzillai's geographical location is so essential. His home was the land of Gilead. It's situated distinctly east of the Jordan River.
Right.
When we picture Israel, we often think of Jerusalem, the Central Highlands. But Gilead was rugged, mountainous, and often isolated. It was geographically distant from all the political machinations of the capital.
And that ruggedness, that distance, it meant the people of Gilead developed a certain self-reliance. They weren't constant players in the court politics of Jerusalem, but, and this is important, this distance didn't mean a lack of connection to the covenant.
Okay.
The research reminds us that Gilead was deeply tied to Israel's foundational story. It even served as a place of refuge. Jacob found sanctuary there.
So they understood their roots.
Exactly. They understood their national and their spiritual roots, even if they weren't, jostling for power in the capital city.
So this geographical reality, it really sets up the risk factor perfectly. When David flees Jerusalem, he crosses the Jordan. He is utterly exposed. He's weary. He's demoralized. He is politically bankrupt. He is no longer the king, really. Absalom is the man on the throne in Jerusalem.
And that's the pivot point. Loyalty to David at that exact moment was not just dangerous. It was an act of treason.
Treason against the currently established government.
Right. Any support offered to David was an act of alignment against Absalom. And if Absalom had held on to power, the people of Gilead, and certainly Barzillai, they would have faced swift and brutal retribution.
So their land, wealth, family.
All of it. It all could have been instantly confiscated or worse.
So the quiet courage that we read about in 2 Samuel 17, it isn't just about charity.
No.
It's about a man risking everything because of a settled conviction about who the true anointed king was, regardless of who held the immediate reins of power.
And this choice, it brings us directly into the culture of the ancient Near East, where these systems of honor, patronage, and reciprocal loyalty, they governed virtually every social and political transaction.
Right.
To grasp Barzillai's greatness, we really have to understand how critical this system was.
Okay, so let's dedicate a moment to unpacking that, the whole patron-client relationship, because it's so foreign to our modern democratic concept.
Absolutely. In the ancient Near East, power was consolidated through loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
A king or a wealthy nobleman, the patron, would bestow favor, protection, or resources on a client.
And in return?
In return, the client owed the patron unwavering reciprocal loyalty, public affirmation of the patron's greatness, and often direct service. It was the social and economic contract that held society together.
So if a king offered a reward, let's say an invitation to live in the palace, or some honorific title, refusing it was.
Almost unthinkable. To refuse was to question the king's wisdom. To diminish his capacity to reward, you are effectively rejecting the entire relationship.
So acceptance was mandatory.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It affirmed the king's power and it secured the client's future.
And this is exactly why Barzillai's actions are so radically countercultural. Because Scripture consistently elevates these individuals who hold earthly honor and political status lightly. Their confidence, their security, it rests in a higher authority in God. They operate outside the mandatory reciprocity of these human systems.
And it's a recurring, powerful tradition. When Barzillai refuses the king's reward, he is walking in the footsteps of the patriarchs.
Talk about that connection.
Well, think of Abraham in Genesis 14. After he rescues Lot and defeats the kings, the king of Sodom comes to Abraham and says, "Give me the people, but take the goods for yourself."
Okay.
And Abraham's response is incredibly chilling. He swears, "I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich."
Wow. That is the parallel we need to focus on. Abraham refused to let a worldly king claim credit for his wealth. He was protecting the integrity of God's provision in his life.
Exactly. And centuries later, Barzillai refuses a similar offer of elevation. He's safeguarding his heart's contentment from being attributed to David's favor rather than the Lord's blessing.
It's so profound.
Barzillai demonstrates beautifully that God's plan moves forward not through people who desperately grasp for the world's definition of success.
You know, palace life, proximity to power.
Right. But through those who are already trusting the Lord's provision implicitly. And because of that, they're free to serve without any expectation of an earthly return. That freedom is monumental.
And this seemingly small act of contentment is woven into the tapestry of God's long-range plan. We have to remember that this whole volatile era, Absalom's rebellion, it wasn't just a historical blip. It directly threatened the established Davidic line.
The stakes were astronomical. I mean, if David had been killed or politically neutralized at that moment, the covenant God made with him.
The promise from 2 Samuel 7.
Yes, that his kingdom and throne would be established forever. It would have been thrown into complete chaos. It was a crisis of succession.
So if we look at it from a divine perspective, the Lord used faithful, maybe ordinary individuals like Barzillai to sustain David, to ensure that the divine promise remained firmly on course during a moment of maximum danger.
And the larger implication here is so profoundly encouraging. God's purposes advance not through these dramatic political power moves orchestrated by the elite,
Right.
but through the seemingly small, faithful, quiet acts of loyalty and generosity carried out by ordinary believers.
So Barzillai's plate of food wasn't just lunch.
It was an act of covenant fidelity that had massive consequential ripple effects. Ultimately, it helped secure the lineage that leads to Christ.
Let's turn now to the narrative itself and really unpack the two defining acts that illustrate Barzillai's radical character. We'll start with Act 1, dangerous generosity from 2 Samuel 17.
We have to visualize this scene here. David and his followers are crossing the Jordan River. They are weary, they're hungry, they're vulnerable, and their immediate logistical needs are immense.
I can't even imagine the chaos. The lack of infrastructure, the impossibility of finding enough food to feed hundreds of people on the run.
And the crushing psychological weight of fleeing your own son.
Yeah.
And this is where Barzillai, along with two others, Shobi and Makir, makes his entrance.
And the list of provisions Scripture gives us is just astounding. It suggests not just charity, but a massive, sustained logistical operation.
It really was. He brought beds, basins, wheat, barley flour, parched grain, beans, lentils.
Honey, curds, sheep, and cheese.
I mean, this wasn't a gift. This was a full operational supply chain designed to stabilize a king and his entire fleeing army.
It speaks volumes about his wealth, for sure.
It does, but more importantly, his willingness to deploy that wealth at maximum risk.
Right.
Our source material really emphasizes this. This was far beyond mere kindness. This was actively dangerous. Every bed, every sheep, every basin was a statement of political allegiance against Absalom.
Because Absalom was still occupying Jerusalem, he was the current usurper, holding all the political and military power.
So by providing these essential supplies, Barzillai publicly aligned himself, his family, his resources, everything, with the defeated party.
And had Absalom consolidated his victory,
Barzillai's name would have been at the very top of the execution and confiscation list.
his willingness to risk his entire estate and his life for God's anointed king, regardless of the immediate political cost. It just echoes this profound fidelity.
It does. It connects us back to the best examples of loyalty found throughout Israel's formation.
You see that same pattern with those who supported Moses in the wilderness years, right? Those who quietly upheld God's chosen leader when the majority were questioning or rebelling.
Exactly. This act establishes Barzillai not as some political opportunist waiting to see which way the wind blew, but as a man of deep, settled conviction whose loyalty was fixed on the divine order, not on temporary human power structures.
And that conviction is what makes the second act of his life so powerful. Now we move to Act 2. Humble refusal of honor, which we find in 2 Samuel 19.
So David is victorious, Absalom is defeated, and the king returns in triumph. The entire dynamic just flips.
And David, remembering Barzillai's incredible generosity and risk, offers him the highest possible reward. He invites Barzillai to cross the Jordan with him, come to Jerusalem, and essentially spend the rest of his days under the king's direct patronage. A comfortable, honored retirement at the palace.
And just to reiterate the cultural importance here, this was the pinnacle of achievement in the ancient Near East. It meant status, security, and an enduring legacy.
Every ambitious man in Israel would have coveted this.
Every single one.
But Barzillai declines. He does it with a humility that defines his profound, confident contentment. And his words are really the core text for understanding the man. Let's look at exactly what he says.
He begins by stating his age. I am now 80 years old. And he follows it with this beautiful, poignant reflection on mortality and diminishing earthly pleasures.
Right.
He asks, how many more years will I live that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? He notes, can your servant taste and see anything? Can I hear the voice of singing men and singing women anymore?
This isn't bitterness. You don't read it as bitterness or ingratitude.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's a peaceful, rational acceptance of his life stage.
Mm-hmm.
He recognizes that the rewards of Jerusalem, the feasting, the music, the palace intrigue, they wouldn't be true pleasures for a man his age anymore.
They'd be obligations.
Or worse, distractions. His desire is remarkably simple and profound. Let your servant return, that I may die in my own town near the tomb of my father and mother.
He's prioritizing his spiritual peace, the rootedness of his heritage over temporary royal prestige.
Exactly. His refusal stems from knowing his place before God and accepting the end of his earthly days, rather than craving some new chapter defined by status.
It's the ultimate statement of sufficiency. I already have everything I need.
Yes.
Everything the king can offer me now would just detract from the most important thing, finishing well and resting peacefully among my own people.
And, even more revealing than the refusal itself is the gracious redirection he performs immediately after.
Right.
He doesn't just say no and walk away. He ensures the blessing is passed on.
He asks David to bless Chimham instead, who is identified as his servant or maybe his son. He passes the opportunity for royal favor onto a younger man who could actually utilize and enjoy palace life.
That is a truly radical gesture. In a culture where family honor was everything and the reward was earned by his risk, Barzillai actively transfers the patronage to another person.
It just reveals a heart completely free from envy, free from the need for personal recognition. He wasn't hoarding the opportunity. He was investing it in the next generation.
We have to pause on Chimham for a second. The fact that Barzillai was so thoughtful about who should get the benefit. a younger person who could benefit from court access and influence, it shows his spiritual maturity wasn't passive at all.
No.
He was still engaged, still thinking strategically about how God's faithful servants could be blessed, even if it wasn't him personally. And this selfless redirection is one of the most potent spiritual parallels in the whole story. It really reflects the heart of John the Baptist. He had the spotlight, he had the crowds, but he declared with joy, he must increase, but I must decrease.
It's that same joy.
It's the joy of seeing God's work continue and the next generation rise, even if it means your own spotlight fades completely.
So the summary of the narrative is just crystal clear. Barzillai's story ends not with him grasping for compensation or fighting for a greater title, but quietly stepping back, completely satisfied with the provision, the life, and the home the Lord had already provided for him.
He knew when to enter the stage with generosity, and he knew when to exit with grace.
So if we move into the theological implications, Barzillai's life really transcends these simple moral lessons about humility, doesn't it? It illustrates a key biblical principle that, well, it operates across both covenants.
What's fascinating here is that his entire life exemplifies the principle that God's great purposes move forward through people who are driven by a fundamental trust in him,
Right.
rather than being motivated by the expectation of an immediate human reward or status.
We need to connect this faith-driven contentment firmly back to the patriarchs.
Yes, we do. Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness.
Oh,
Barzillai operates on this same principle of faith. He believed in the divine covenant with David, and he acted on that belief without calculating the cost or, the expected payoff.
his refusal of royal favor, it illustrates this enduring principle that life lived under God's grace is never about earning status or reward from human authorities. It's about living in a grateful response to the abundance God has already provided. He was wealthy enough in Gilead, spiritually and materially, that David's gold held no temptation for him.
And this naturally anticipates the apostolic message under the new covenant. Barzillai shows us this internal, grace-driven contentment centuries before Paul ever penned the words in Philippians 4.
Where Paul learned the secret of contentment in both abundance and want.
Exactly.
Let's break down how Barzillai embodies that duality. His abundance was his life in Gilead, his wealth, his home, his standing, which allowed him to fund an army. And his want was his refusal of the palace, voluntarily choosing to forego the status and ease that everyone else craved. He demonstrated mastery over both his wealth and his potential promotion.
He teaches us that true freedom comes when we are no longer bound to an outward system of human reward.
Whether that's a palace job, a corporate title,
Or social media validation today.
Yeah.
But are instead guided and sustained by the Spirit in stewarding whatever God has placed in our hands.
The source of competence shifts entirely. It's a move away from human striving and toward divine sufficiency. We see this so powerfully expressed in 2 Corinthians 3, where Paul reminds us that our competence is not in ourselves, but is from God.
Right.
The focus shifts from achieving external honor to relying completely on internal, spiritual guidance and provision. Barzillai didn't need the court to validate his worth. He was already validated by his faith.
And crucially, we must not lose sight of the higher theological purpose behind his act of loyalty. Barzillai's fidelity played a crucial role in safeguarding the messianic promise itself.
Reiterate that importance for us. Absalom's revolt wasn't just palace intrigue. It was a crisis that could have terminated the Davidic line.
Precisely. The Lord promised that the Messiah, the true king, would come through David's lineage. David's survival was paramount to the ultimate execution of God's redemptive plan.
So Barzillai's seemingly small, faithful act of providing food and logistical support.
Yes, and political cover. It helped stabilize the king and safeguard that line. His service points directly forward to the future fullness of God's kingdom, to the true Son of David reigning in righteousness, as prophesied so beautifully in Isaiah 9.
I think this is profound encouragement for the thoughtful Christian today. It really validates those small, quiet acts of faithfulness that may never make the headlines.
Absolutely. Even an act as seemingly mundane as providing sustenance, showing steadfast loyalty, or just being reliable where you are planted. Barzillai's small actions played a supporting role in God's long-range plan that stretches across millennia, from the monarchy to the coming reign of Christ.
It tells us that our faithful obedience, even in private, has eternal consequence. Finally, Barzillai's contentment. It underscores the theological truth that God's people live in a state of blessing that is real yet incomplete.
Right.
We taste now what will be fully realized later.
And Barzillai modeled this posture of hope perfectly. He enjoyed God's present provision, his land, his wealth, his family life in Gilead. But he did not cling to earthly honors as if they were the ultimate fulfillment or the end goal.
He modeled a spiritual posture of waiting for something better, something enduring.
Yes, that ultimate homecoming that echoes the believer's hope for future glory, which is described so powerfully in Romans 8, where we wait eagerly for the redemption of our bodies.
So we've established the context, detailed the narrative, clarified the theological weight. Now the crucial pivot. What does this life, lived 3,000 years ago, mean for the thoughtful Christian living today, especially in our hyper-competitive, status-driven society?
Well, Barzillai's story presents a radical challenge to modern values. It really does.
Mm-hmm.
We are conditioned by our culture to believe that a successful life requires constant advancement, continuous recognition, and the relentless, exhausting pursuit of more. Barzillai says, wait, what if enough is the greatest blessing?
Let's call it the conflict between the palace life and the Gilead life.
I like that.
The palace life demands you stay visible, constantly network, chase promotion, and measure your self-worth by your proximity to power and influence.
Well, the Gilead life, it prizes quiet devotion, integrity, self-sufficiency under God, and peace over promotion.
And Barzillai chose Gilead. His quiet joy in returning home, back to the simplicity and peace of his region, rather than chasing the glittering, superficial status of court life. It reflects immense spiritual wisdom.
It beautifully illustrates the wisdom found in Proverbs 16:8. Better is a little with righteousness than much with injustice.
That choice forces us to consider our own metrics, Do we believe that peace with God and integrity in our calling the Gilead life matters more than the title or the paycheck or the recognition of the palace life?
Right. Barzillai teaches us that we should find our ultimate satisfaction in our standing before God, not our standing in the king's court.
But I want to explore a potential tension here, because a thoughtful listener might ask, okay, if we're all content in Gilead, who does the work in Jerusalem?
That's a great question.
Doesn't the world need faithful, content believers in positions of influence acting as salt and light? Was Barzillai's choice maybe a little too withdrawn?
That's a very honest and crucial question. And I think the answer is that Barzillai's contentment did not lead to passivity. He was not a withdrawn recluse who refused to engage.
Okay.
He was an incredibly generous, open-handed provider and servant to David in his greatest hour of need. He engaged precisely when engagement was required and dangerous.
So that's the vital distinction.
It is. True biblical contentment doesn't breed laziness or isolation. It breeds freedom.
Freedom.
Because he was already satisfied, he was free to serve selflessly without the ulterior motive of getting something back. He provided generously because he had peace, not because he needed a palace job.
And that shifts the motivation entirely. Barzillai did not serve David to secure a future reward, nor did he offer help to earn a higher status. He acted out of fidelity and gratitude.
It aligns perfectly with Paul's encouragement to the Corinthians about giving, doesn't it? To give willingly and cheerfully, not under compulsion or as a calculated investment.
Yes.
So the application for Christians is direct.
Yes.
We are called to serve others out of pure gratitude for the grace we have received, not as a calculated way to earn favor or status or a better retirement package from this world.
Barzillai's service was grace-driven, not gain-driven.
Exactly. Our ultimate reward is secured in Christ, and that allows us to serve freely here and now.
There is also just immense pastoral comfort in Barzillai's narrative, especially for those in later seasons of life or those who feel that their greatest visible contributions are maybe behind them.
Yes. Barzillai demonstrates that God values faithful presence and steady obedience just as much, if not more, than the achievement that makes the headlines.
Right.
He didn't seek a grand political finish or an ongoing legacy in the king's court. He sought a peaceful, spiritually mature finish.
This connection to finishing well is so powerful. It really mirrors the story of Simeon in the New Testament.
It does.
Simeon was a righteous and devout man, simply waiting for the consolation of Israel. When he finally saw the infant Jesus, he didn't ask for a new job or promotion. He asked to depart in peace, having seen God's salvation.
And Barzillai found joy in finishing well. He was prepared to die near his family's graves, satisfied that he had fulfilled his duties to God and to his king.
His actions model this profound trust that God's work, the grand, long-range plan for the Messianic kingdom, would continue, even as his own time drew to a close.
That's it. His contentment was complete because he knew God was sovereign and God would sustain the kingdom without his continued political presence in Jerusalem.
He trusted in continuity, not personal indispensability.
And that is true peace.
Barzillai the Gileadite offers us a clear, powerful, and enduring portrait of contentment rooted deeply in faith, rather than in the shifting, volatile circumstances of this world. His life reminds us that God's kingdom is truly built not by those who constantly push or scheme or manipulate for honor and status, but by those who quietly trust the Lord and serve faithfully exactly where they are planted.
He was steady enough to support King David in a dark hour of desperate need, and he was settled enough in his own identity to profoundly decline reward in a bright hour of triumph. This duality proves that a heart settled in God can remain absolutely steady and faithful through both the deepest hardship and the greatest blessing this world can offer.
So you, the listener, you're invited today to cultivate that same spirit of confident contentment. To know that your ultimate inheritance lies not in earthly recognition, not in endless promotion, and not in the fleeting honors of this age, but securely in the steadfast promises of God. In a world that constantly urges people to want more and achieve more, Barzillai stands as a gentle yet powerful witness that simply having God is indeed enough, that living faithfully in one's appointed place is in itself a rich and lasting reward.
As we close this deep dive, we return to the passage that captures his spirit so perfectly, 2 Samuel 19.35-37. Barzillai answered the king, "How many more years will I live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am now 80 years old. Your servant will cross over the Jordan with the king for a short distance. But why should the king reward me in this way? Let your servant return, that I may die in my own town near the tomb of my father and mother."
The core encouragement here is the remarkable freedom that comes from recognizing and accepting your appointed end. This knowledge allows you to prioritize rest and home and spiritual peace and family over the fleeting honors of a king's palace or the demands of worldly ambition.
It is a powerful illustration that the true end goal of life is not promotion or endless visible achievement, but deep enduring faithfulness. It is finding peace with God and peace with one's own life journey, knowing that we have served the Lord where we were planted.
May you find the peace and the deep satisfaction that comes from recognizing when enough is truly enough. And may you trust your life and your end to God's careful and sovereign hand.